Camping with Friends and Something Else. Written by TheGingerWithNoSoul. No one believes me when I try to tell them what happened last weekend. Not the police, not my friends, not even my parents. The thing we met in those woods followed me home, and I don't know how long I have left before it takes me as well. I have to tell someone what happened during last weekend's camping trip. It was winter break for my community college, and I, along with a few friends, decided we were going to go on a camping trip before we all went home to our families for the extended break. The group consisted of me, Kyle, George, and Tony. We all became friends through courses we took together, and I have to say that they made college more exciting. We had big plans for this weekend since it would be about a month before we saw each other again. We planned on leaving around lunch and heading to the Nantahala National Forest where we would be camping. It was about an hour's drive from where we were, so nothing too crazy. After a few days of finally scrounging around for supplies, we found everything we thought we might need. Then the day arrived. We set out around lunch so that we would be able to set everything up by mid-afternoon and be able to hike out to a waterfall that Kyle said he had been to once before. After around an hour, give or take, we finally arrived at the campground and began to set up the 2 tents that we had brought with us. I remember it took longer than we had planned because George and Tony had never been camping before, so it was up to me and Kyle to set everything up. It was hard work, but soon enough we had our campsite up and running. "Hey, you guys," Kyle said with the surplus energy he always had. "Ready to go see what this place has to offer?" "You don't ever get tired, do you, Kyle?" George said with a sarcastic remark. "It'll be worth it, I swear. Just hurry up so that we can make it back before dark," Kyle said. And with that, we set off. Around an hour later, with leg muscles threatening to cramp at any moment, we finally reached the waterfall. Now, I won't lie to you, it was a sight to see. There were 2 large boulders at the top, and the waterfall led down to this almost crystal clear pool where it slowly trailed back down to the base of the mountain. The pool was so clear we could even see the few fish that had made this place their home. We had brought a few snacks with us, so we all sat down and ate for a while. We were finishing up our food when we heard what sounded like large branches being snapped. It was like a bulldozer trying to make its way down the mountain. Then, this animalistic cry that shook my bones came from past the top of the waterfall, somewhere hidden within the dense foliage. All of us stood up wide-eyed and were looking around trying to find the source of the scene that was playing out somewhere within the woods. "I think it's about time we head back down," Tony said while frantically putting on his backpack. Kyle looked over to him. "Guys, where's George?" We were all panicking by this point, looking and trying to find out what had happened to George. He was there 1 second and gone the next. After around 30 minutes of searching and calling out into the never-ending greenery that surrounded us, we tried calling his cell phone, but it wouldn't connect because of the poor service on the mountain. By this point, I had noticed that the sun was setting and it was going to be dark soon. Let's start heading back down, guys." I looked to my 2 friends that remained. "There's a park ranger office not too far from our campsite. We need to tell them what happened so that they can send some help." "We can't just leave George out here," Kyle responded. "If we haven't found him yet, we are just going to have an even harder time when it gets dark. All we have to guide us is the lights from our cell phones." "Cam is right, Kyle," Tony said, defending my claim. "We'll go tell the park rangers and come back with them to help search for him." "All right," Kyle relented. "Let's hurry up so that we can get back and find him." We finally started our way back down the mountain. The sun was setting, and we knew we wouldn't make it back to the ranger cabin until after dark. We walked as fast as we could down the rough trail that had guided us here. That's when we heard more branches snapping in the distance. We all froze and stared off for what felt like an eternity. We still didn't find whatever caused the disturbance, and we continued down the mountain. It was probably 5 or 10 minutes before the sun fully set and darkness would overtake the mountain when we heard its cry again. This time, though, it was much, much closer. Stay close, guys. We don't need anyone else getting lost before we get off this trail, I said to the two next to me with a false sense of confidence. What is following us? Tony said, and I could hear the fear in his voice. Do you think that whatever it is got George? Let's just hurry up, Tony. Right now, we need to focus on getting off this mountain, Kyle said while beginning to move once again down the path. I swear I am never camping for good after this. Both me and Tony followed suit close behind him. We walked on pins and needles for the next few minutes with all of our concentration on our surroundings. At this point, we had to retrieve the flashlights Tony had in his bag to see where we were headed because it was now so dark on the mountain. That's when we came around a sharp curve in the trail and found ourselves face to face with a tree that was now obscuring our path to safety. It was a decent-sized oak tree that looked like it had been ripped straight out of the ground with its roots still attached and everything. It also had branches protruding in all directions that obscured our view past it. It looks like there's enough space for us to crawl under it, Kyle said while leaning down to check the space from the tree to the ground. There's no way I'm doing that, Tony said. That thing is going to collapse on top of me as soon as I try to go under it. There's no other way around it, Tony, I say while putting my hand on his shoulder for reassurance. Me and Kyle will go through first so that you can see that it's secure enough. All right, let's get a move on, Kyle said as he began making his way under the tree. Kyle made it through and gave us the all clear. I looked back to Tony and gave him a thumbs up and went under the tree as well. While I was making my way, I looked at the trunk of the tree and I noticed claw marks wrapped around the trunk, as if something had carried it. This made the hairs on my neck stand on end. At last, I finally made my way through and we both stood there waiting for Tony. Tony, you coming or what? Kyle called out. There was no response. Come on, Tony, we gotta hurry up so that we can get help, I said with unease mounting. That's when from off in the distance we heard screaming. It was Tony. Whatever was following us down the mountain had placed that tree there so that it could take my friend. The screaming lasted for what felt like an eternity that was followed by pleas for his life. Please, please help me. And just like that, the forest was returned to a deafening silence. We both just ran. I was running, branches flying in my face, narrowly catching myself from falling over due to exposed roots. I wanted nothing more than to reach the bottom of this mountain and see the light of the ranger's office. After what felt like forever, I finally saw the lights. I was so overjoyed that I nearly cried. Hurry up, Kyle, we're almost... I looked around. There was no sign of him. He was just gone. While running, I wasn't paying any attention to anything other than getting off of that mountain as soon as possible. I hadn't even noticed that he wasn't behind me. I began walking up to the office in a daze. I had scrapes and bruises covering nearly every bit of exposed skin on my body. Finally, noticing the park rangers coming out of the cabin, I just stopped and froze. They walked over to me and took me to the porch to explain what had happened. I told them the whole story of the events that had played out, and they decided to call the police to help with the search party they were trying to pull together to go and find my friends. Then, "Hey, Cam!" I looked over and it was him. George was standing right there. He looked perfectly fine, like nothing had even happened. "Where did you go, man? We were looking everywhere for you. I thought whatever was out there had gotten you too," I said as I bounded off the porch and gave my now only friend a hug. At this point, I had no clue that something was amiss. I was just happy that I wasn't the only one left. When I hugged him, he stayed as stiff as a board. He didn't even look bothered at the events that were playing out. I backed off him and noticed that his lips were slowly curling up into a grin. This smile he made stretched a little further than it should have, to the point where I thought that his mouth would rip. That's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. This was not George. This was the thing that had taken him. I screamed and yelled to anyone that would listen that this wasn't my friend. But they all just looked at me like I was crazy. That's when the police showed up and questioned both of us about what had happened. They saw nothing wrong with George's story, even though I kept on telling them that it wasn't him. They all just assumed that I was in shock from losing my friends. They cleared us both, and as dawn was breaking the next morning, I was on my way home. I refused to leave with George, so one of the police had to take him to our community college. I made sure to get home and grab what little I needed so I could leave as soon as possible. On my way out, I looked to see him standing at the front door of my dormitory. The George thing had that same smile stretched across his face. I feel like he is just tormenting me with the knowledge that all of my friends are dead, and that the culprit is standing right in front of me. "Have a nice trip home," it said with a voice that sounded almost human, but carried an animalistic undertone that sent chills up my spine. It has been 3 days now. The search party that went in search of my friends haven't found anything except for one of Kyle's hiking boots, which was now painted a crimson color from the fluid that once gave him life. There was no trace of Tony, and I knew that they probably wouldn't find any. The main reason I'm trying to get this story out is because last night, while looking out my bedroom window, it was there. George was standing on the edge of the sidewalk with that same god-awful smile. He was standing right at the edge of what the street lamp illuminated, and it cast an eerie shadow over him and illuminated the thing's eyes that were reflected in a way that only an animal's would. I know I don't have much time left before I become food for whatever this creature is. I managed to lose so much in what was supposed to be a fun weekend with friends. George is outside again tonight. I know my time is almost up, so let me finish this with a warning. Don't go camping in Nantahala National Forest. Something might follow you home.